right, ladies, I am so excited to have these two fabulous women on the couch this evening, morning, afternoon, depending on when you're watching this video. We welcome you to this video. But I'm especially excited to be on this couch with my co-workers, former co-workers, friends extraordinaire. Welcome to the couch, back to the couch, actually, our registered dietitian for HBC. Okay. Hey, Veronica, welcome back.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me.
Hey. And welcome for the first time on the couch, Antonia Johnson. Thank you for joining us, our physician assistant extraordinaire, working primarily in the areas of family medicine. So I'm excited to have you on the couch, Antonia. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
And I brought you ladies specifically. I asked you guys to be on this couch this evening because I wanted to talk about something that I needed your advice on and your input on. We're going to talk about ethics in medicine when it comes to genetic testing. We're all in different specialties, right? So we'll talk about it in reference to our own specialty and our own experiences. But genetic testing is becoming so common that literally you can swab your own mouth and send something to a company and get all this information that, you know, you're from Angola, you're like 16% European, you're like 30 something percent West Indian or whatever, and it goes on and on. So it's now becoming almost common to do. The question is, where are we going with all this genetic testing? Are there things we should really think about? First of all, let's talk about what we do in terms of genetic testing. I could definitely say from an OB's perspective, the value of genetic testing in the process of IVF. So for IVF, there is pre-implantation genetic testing that helps to really identify, especially when you have a couple or potential parents that have specific ethnic backgrounds that are prone to have certain types of genetic disorders. It's really helpful to be able to identify those disorders and select the embryo that is the healthiest embryo so that the couple or the potential parent can have the most successful pregnancy, right? So what other applications of genetic testing have you guys heard about?
I know specifically for myself, being a parent and also being a dietitian, genetic testing is important from the minute that, you know, a person is born. You know, we run a blood test, you know, through a drop of blood through the baby's foot when they're born to make sure that they don't have PKU. And as we know that, you know, if somebody does have PKU, you know, it is detrimental for them to eat certain types of nutrients in the diet. We know that there's certain autosomal recessive genetic disorders at birth that may predispose certain ethnic groups to specifically folate deficiencies. So, you know, think about us females that, you know, if in the future we want to have children, you know, that is something of significance, especially when we want to have children, because we want to make sure that our children do not have neural tube deficiencies and so forth. So, you know, those are two of the main, you know, aspects that I can think of. A third one would be, you know, if a couple wants to have genetic counseling done, and say if there's certain, you know, diseases like cancer in their family. So I have had couples that tell me, you know, there's this risk. And I think we'll kind of circle back to the conversation. But thank you for asking.
Yeah, those were really good examples. So certainly in the pediatric population, we use genetic testing a lot. And certain tests, as Veronica mentioned, are done routinely at birth. What are your experiences been like, Antonia? What type of tests are you running for your patients or have heard about or discussed?
Similarly to Veronica, coming from family medicine, a lot of the tests that we do are preventative measures. So similar to screening for certain aneuploidies or trisomies that may occur during pregnancies. So for example, for Down syndrome, we screen for that. As well as like the BRCA1 and BRCA2 genes, screening for breast cancer and susceptibility to that. Those are mainly my uses of genetic testing in primary care.
So it sounds like we're all kind of saying in terms of like disease identification, disease management, disease prevention, identifying as Antonia, thank you for mentioning the screening tests that we do for women who may be at risk for breast cancer and other types of ovarian and uterine cancer. We do the BRCA gene for those who have familial risk factors, right? Some of the things that are kind of becoming a little bit more new or coming into is actually more in your field, Veronica, so I'm going to touch on it a little bit, is the use of genetic testing for example, there some of the more controversial areas is genetic testing for athletes, right? So there's some talk about genetic testing to determine who is the better sprinter, and identifying someone who may be a better sprinter versus a better marathon runner because of certain things about our genetic predispositions. So that's some of the newer topics that people are approaching. Genetic testing for when you're dealing with someone's fitness and health, identifying people who may have certain genetic predispositions to nutritional issues or fitness issues. And the question is, how does that really work? I know there's some limitation. I will mention this, even though there's some talk of nutrition and genetic testing, it hasn't yet been shown to truly have an impact in the outcome yet. So we know we can do the testing. We don't know how to do the testing, how to apply it. But the question is, should we go down these areas? Like, should we really be evaluating who is more fit based on their genetic makeup? Are we opening Pandora's box? What do you ladies think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think that there is concern, and again, I'm always going to go back to, information may be subjective. I know that myself and you, Dr. Moore, have had conversation of who is actually getting researched, right? When we think of research institutions, especially the nutrition ones, I'm thinking of East Coast more, I live in California. But I'm thinking of the more traditional universities that are top quality nutrition researchers. And we know from doing assessments, they're primarily researching white males, white male athletes, right? Whoever is at the university. So I think there are limitation factors. So even if they, I would say that yes, if, maybe the professional leagues are going to start to invest money in doing these types of testing, I think that we really start to maybe make more inclusivity in general, test maybe various groups, not just the typical group that we see commonly researched in a lot of nutrition studies, a lot of nutrition cohort studies, for that matter, the double-blinded studies. It appears to be a lot of the same population. So I'm going to say that. I think that there's another part where obviously the consent part, right? Are we going to even give people the option, right? If you are a student and you want to be at a university, are you going to have to sign this as part of perhaps your scholarship, as part of your agreement to be admitted to the university? So I feel like we may definitely be opening up a Pandora's box in that sense, that there may be some, agreements or conditions that are attached to that.
Yes. And, certainly that is the elephant in the room, right? Because we have experienced as Black and Brown people so much disparity when it comes to the health system. So I think part of the concern is this information going to be used to my benefit, or is this information going to potentially be used to my detriment? And that was a great example, scholarship based on, like, if you're coming as an athlete to a school and a school decides to do genetic testing, and determines that based on your genes, you shouldn't be the greatest sprinter, that perhaps they don't want to invest money in you as an athlete. Like there are very much consequences. Any other consequences that you guys can think of? Any other issues related to the genetic testing or ethical lines that we may be crossing?
I think some other issues are if they start running other tests that maybe you don't consent to. Like, say, for example, if they're testing genetics, like what type of muscle fibers you have, fast twitch versus slow twitch. Okay, so I would see, point in maybe testing for that. But then what if they start testing for, if you have a predisposition for mental health, for mental health disorders, and so that is just my concern, is there going to be a limit or a cap onto what they can test for, and just excluding people for certain other conditions, if you're predisposed to autoimmune disease or bone diseases and so forth. So, I don't know. I'm just curious to see.
Yeah. Yeah, you're so right about that. And I wonder, like, even about the voluntary testing, I will definitely admit I didn't get swabbed. I didn't swab myself. I didn't swab my family. I do want to know where our origins are, but I'm a little hesitant on doing the swab. Okay. And part of that is because, I remember, and I don't remember which one of the companies, but not that long ago, one of those companies was sold the information. And that is also the concern. It's like, okay, I may swab and this may be cool. I find out I'm 3% this and 5% that and 90 something percent something else. But do I have control over that information? Do I own that information? And the answer is no, the company does, right? So what can companies potentially do with this information is one of the questions. How do you guys feel about that?
I think that what my mind is going to is, I guess, the ownership of cells and our ownership of our own DNA. As Veronica brought up, like once, you consent to do one thing, but they may run additional testing. For example, in the example of Henrietta Lack, from her cells, we have the cornerstone of so many vaccines and cures of polio, but her family knew nothing of it. So where was the ethics or the moral code when informing the family of the processes going on? And for years, they would go to the family's house and just take samples for them and tell them like, oh, we're just screening you for a cancer. So not giving informed consent. These folks are just, terrified because they lost their mother suddenly. So they're doing everything that they're going to comply. They're going to do exactly what they're asking for them. Meanwhile, this whole time, they're exploiting their DNA for monetary gains, shipping these cells out to Europe, Japan, all across the world.
Mm-hmm.
And no one even knew.
Speak on it. Speak on it. And I'm so glad that you brought up that point, because that is not in theory. That is an actual event that actually happened. It is history. She has basically caused just a number of modern medicine to be advanced based on her cells unknowingly, right? And so that's such a great example of that. And some people may ask the question, I know one of the things that people ask about is, well, what about insurance companies? Can insurance companies utilize this information to decide that they're not going to insure me?
It's a title, the Genetic Information Nondiscrimination Act, GINA.
Yes. Thank you so much for that.
2008.
And that act made it so that insurance companies, in 2008, so insurance companies are not allowed to use your genetic information to determine whether or not to determine what services they want to provide, or whether or not they're going to, adjust your premium based on your genetic history. However, what I do find interesting about that particular law is the fact that they do have access to the information. They're just not allowed to utilize it in their assessment of how they're going to insure you. Now, you may ask the question that I asked myself: how do we ensure that that's not happening? Who's regulating this? As far as I know, I don't know with any regulation that, or any type of review that is being done actively to make sure that the two aren't coincide, right? So there's certainly some very gray areas that I think we really need to address more. I know that also in OB, one of the big ethical questions is with pre-implantation genetic testing. So it's really important if someone has a family history of sickle cell, and this might be a dating question too, because I do know a friend, I'm not going to call my friend out, but I do know a friend who said because in her family, she has the sickle cell trait, that part of her dating criteria is to find out whether or not someone she's dating has the sickle cell trait as well. And if someone has the sickle cell trait, she will not date them. That's how serious sickle cell disease is for her. Yes. And it is that serious. Sickle cell disease, again, we don't understand why single gene defect is still not there. We're not there yet with advanced science and modern science. But anyway, that's a whole other conversation, right? But sickle cell disease is a very devastating disease. And so I do understand her concern with not having to conceive a child that could potentially have the disease. So I get that application, but then there's some people that are maybe asking, can you implant the boy? Can you implant the girl? What do you guys think about that? Gender determination, or, biological gender determination, or other things. Like I may want the girl who has the gene for, I don't know, long hair, or the boy that has the gene for an athletic build, so he can become an athlete, because his dad's an athlete. Like, is this a slippery slope? What do you guys think about that kind of stuff?
I think we're entering a very gray area. So I know there's some folks that want to, come up with their dream baby, or I want him to have my daddy's eyes or my lips, but we're diluting the gene pool. We're actually essentially trying to play God. And for human evolution, we need these genetic variations to erupt so that we can evolve as a people, as a species. So right now we're kind of going to this gene purity. We're only going to have, certain amount of people with blue eyes or certain amount of people with, brown eyes. And I just think it's this slippery slope. It's like once you start one thing, and then also looking at how they're editing genes and they're thinking they're getting the right thing, but they're just losing these huge chunks of DNA, which we don't know what's going to have effect later.
That is such a great point. Can we pause on that point? So I love the fact that she brought up about the natural evolution, right? That Darwin's theory that to some degree we evolve as a human race based on our experiences, our environment, our exposure, and perhaps choosing genetic makeups based on our personal desire may actually, oh, that's so deep. Wait. Choosing our genetic desire may actually be compromising that generation because they're not a result of the evolution process, but they're now being chosen based on personal preferences, which may not necessarily be the best option for what they're going to experience or what their generation is going to have to be able to be resilient against, right? Whether it's disease processes, we have COVID now. Suppose you pick a genetic makeup that is susceptible to COVID, whereas the natural evolution as the infection spread is that we're going to build a generation that is now resistant to it, right? Or have some buildup in you. That's so deep. I'm going to sit on that one. That's a really, really good point. Really, really good point. And then the other question too, in terms of like genetic selection is, are you really going to get what you like? It almost ignores exactly what you're talking about, but to a different perspective. It ignores the fact that environment experience has an impact on genes, right? So yes, you may choose the person that is the best sprinter based on their genetic makeup. I think it's the Achilles testing something, don't quote me on that, but I think it's something like that, where they are able to determine the best sprinter. I forgot the gene. You have to look it up. But what if you choose the person that is the best genetic makeup to be the best sprinter, but you ignore the environmental influence? So maybe they grew up in an environment that didn't allow them to really enhance those genetic capabilities. And we kind of assume, and this is the whole thing circling back to the conversation of epigenetics and the influence of environment and experiences on the expression of our genes. So you can't just really choose something and expect to get it, because it may turn out to be the worst sprinter because there are other interactions of other genes, and that person may decide, I hate sprinting. Like, you chose me, but I hate sprinting, right? Or you may choose the person that doesn't have the genetic makeup for it to be the best sprinter, but they have the power and the will and the drive, those genes that would have made them overcome their physical limitations. So it's really good.
Yeah,
some knowledge.
I mean, and definitely, I kind of want to speak about a personal experience that I had. When I was pregnant the third time, I have 4 total children. I had caught bronchitis, at around 6 months in pregnancy. So I was severely allergic to the antibiotic they gave me to, and, I developed pneumonia, a pretty severe case to where I had to be hospitalized. And the few things that I can remember from the first day that I arrived, I ended up being there a week, was, the doctor telling me is, look, because you're allergic to this antibiotic, we're not sure what these other antibiotics can do. We don't really test them, obviously, in pregnancy. So there's a risk here. What do you want to do? And I said, well, what is the risk? Oh, well, you may have some, harm done to the baby, X, Y, and Z. And I said, well, I have 2 kids at home. And no matter what happens with my baby, the point of me getting married and having kids is to have a family. So even if, something happens to my kid, it's not like I'm going to love them less. So yes, my daughter did, she early on, we were able to determine that she had severe learning disabilities, and later on was diagnosed with a mild form of retardation. And so, again, being an advocate for her and getting her, the different types of services so that she can flourish. Even her neurologist, right, at her, when she was a child, she's an adult now, said, make sure that she doesn't swim. Well, lo and behold, when she was in high school, she tried out for the junior varsity water polo team and ended up being one of their best water polo players, and so she's
perfect example, right?
Yeah, she's in college now, she's dating and she's living a beautiful life. And so I am left to wonder if I had been a person to really sit down with someone and say, well, tell me genetically what my kid is going to be predisposed to. And I don't know, what would I have said back then, 20, 30 years ago to your daughter's going to be born with MR. If you have a daughter, would I have chosen something different? I love her so much. I love her so much. And she brings so much joy to the family. And so again, she's living lived experiences. And so again, a lot of the times, even when there is research, it doesn't mean that it's good. And then just because there is no research doesn't mean that there's not other things that we can explore. So again, though that information is subjective. And again, those are my lived experience, and it's not something that you can measure in a genetic test.
That is thank you so much, Veronica, for sharing that personal experience and insight. That goes to show you, right? The science says one thing, but it doesn't always mean it's not an absolute science, right? And we're such complex beings. Like we try to make the human race is this simple 1 + 1 = 2, and it's not. Genes interact with each other, they interact with the environment, they turn on, they turn off. Infections can turn genes on, can turn genes off. We know that from HPV. We know that human papillomavirus can turn on cancer-form genes called oncogenes. So there are a number of trauma can express different types of genes. So even psychologically, we can have a different expression of a genetic makeup based on our experiences. So there are so many things that really interact with our genetic makeup. And I really do wonder, as genetic testing become easier and more marketable, will we get to the point where if I'm dating, I may not date that person because she has the genes for infertility? Like where are we going with this? There are so many, and then you have, back to Antonia's point also, the natural mixing of genes that's supposed to happen by the random experience of dating one person and just meeting another person and trying to blend together as a family based on experiences and likeness, as opposed to genetic makeup, right? But if we get to the point where it becomes primarily about genetic makeup, or if it is even is a factor, we may then choose so differently. And to your experience, to your point, Veronica, and to your experience, I guess that was an Freudian slip, to your experience and your point, we may be voiding ourselves as such beautiful experiences. What is this thing about us wanting to people that are like us, be like us, our preferences, and not really being open to just anything, things that are the unfamiliar. And I think it's maybe speaking to our psychological defects in wanting to control outcomes. And maybe that's the factor that's leading to this desire to have more exposure to genetic workups. I don't know. How do you guys feel about the testing for even just the ethnic background and the ethnic history? Like, what's a healthy way of utilizing that information? Or is there a healthy way of utilizing that information, since that's the more commercial form of testing that we have access to? Have you guys gotten tested? I'm curious. Have you guys gotten tested?
I haven't personally. I do know people. I just don't know. I think that as a species, like, we're not isolable, so we have this connection to want to make connections with one another and trace our ancestries back. But I'm like, how accurate is that? Like, am I going to feel more connected to my family or myself or my cultural background, knowing that I'm like 3% Zimbabwean or something? I just don't see the benefit and how it will correlate to me. I know there's like a big push. Folks are trying to like get their ancestry done. So in the case that we get some reprimands, they can trace it right back. So I could see a use for that. But just personally, I'm not sure if I'll have that connection of just knowing that my blood is similar to someone's DNA that was in Europe, in which we know that once they did the Human Genome Project, we see that we're nearly not that different.
Right.
So
right.
that's my only
Have you
reason
done
for
the
not doing
testing,
it.
Veronica? Would you test?
You know what? I have not, but my husband, my brother, and my daughter, they all did it at the same time.
Oh.
And, you know, one of my brother's friends who actually, you know, was adopted, and he has no information for his family background or even what his demographic, you know, his ethnicity is or his heritage. So he was the one that kind of, you know, inspired everyone else to get tested. My husband specifically paid a little bit extra for his because he wanted to know what disease genetically he was predisposed to. And so, you know, that same thing, my brother also paid a little bit extra. My daughter didn't. But again, you know, they came back with like certain percentages. You're predisposed to, you know, heart disease or diabetes or prostate cancer. So it was very interesting, you know.
So how, let me ask you a question on that, because I do find that to be interesting. I'm gonna tap into that a little bit more. Once they get that information, then what happens? Like, are people changing their lifestyle? They make different decisions? Like, what happens when you get that information? When you find out, oh, you're predisposed to heart disease or you're predisposed to diabetes. I mean, we can kind of tell some of that based on our family history, but what happens when you get that genetic confirmation?
You know, I think my husband had a serious conversation with his primary care doctor. He said, look, the tests are telling me pretty much identical to what, you know, they have a very small family, like very small. And so he said, you know, yes, my uncle passed away of this disease and the test is telling me this. So even though like my husband was not at the age yet where they start doing colonoscopies and endoscopies, the doctor highly recommended for him to get it done. And so for him, that gave him peace of mind, saying, okay, I know because of the risk factor in the family, I have to get, you know, this procedure done every so often. And so, you know, again, I could see the benefit in that.
That's so interesting. I didn't even think about that aspect of it, the way it changes medical practice, right? So now if patients come to us with commercial testing, and they have a genetic predisposition for something, do we then veer from the standard? Because there really is no guidelines really regarding this currently for most things. Like if my patient come back and says, hey, I have a predisposition for Alzheimer's, then what do? Like, do I start doing more cognitive activities? It's just so much. There's so much. And there's so much that we don't really know, right? We don't really know how the genetic testing, the type of genetic testing that's being done, how it really correlates with outcome. And we still don't know that information. So we definitely need more research on that. But it's interesting. Certainly if I felt that genetic testing would change the lifestyle or the habits of my patients, then I'm all for it. Like if they know that they're at risk for diabetes and they didn't have any otherwise indication on that based on their family history, then yeah, then we will go full force ahead to be healthier. But I think a lot of these things we can be kind of healthier anyway, just in general, because that's what we're supposed to do, right? And some of these things we can kind of figure out based on family history alone. But I like the point that you brought up. I can see the value in it if I was adopted and I don't have or estranged from my family and I don't have that information, then yeah, this would be highly valuable. To get that information, to know, what I'm at risk for and filling those medical gaps. So, wow, there's a lot to think about with this, you guys. There's a lot to think about. As we talk, I'm thinking about even more scenarios. I'm like, wow, this is a lot. It's a lot. But I will say I do see value in genetic testing. I'm concerned about the abuse of it. And that's basically, as a clinician, as a person, as a human being, as an African-American female, I'm really concerned about the abuse of genetic testing, and how what safeguards we put up legally, what safeguards we put up medically, because again, Black women are hugely at a huge disadvantage when it comes to the health system. We know this. The maternal mortality statistics clarify and confirm that. But would this information make any difference? And I hope that it would, but what if it doesn't? What if it just kind of makes the disparity even worse? There are so many applications to genetic testing. And I know that one of the industries that's using genetic testing a lot is the athletic industry, right? What do you guys think about that? The application of genetic testing in with athletes?
I mean, I think it's definitely that something that is maybe new to the US. And from my understanding, whenever we do research, when I think of the different phases of research, it can take up to 10 years to come up with something, put it through the various clinical trials. But we know that other countries are definitely doing some type of genetic breeding to where even, they will produce professional athletes. And those professional athletes, whether it's through the, various competitive sports like the Olympics, they look a lot more superior than some of the athletes here in the US. So, again, you're just kind of left to wonder if, that's just something that, again, the US is considering doing.
That's such a great point. The fact that, yeah, it may be something novel to us, but there are other countries that don't think that there's an ethical issue with doing this, and with other types of government structures also. Have you noticed or heard of any applications in the US where any type of situation where athletes were sort of genetically not necessarily made, but perhaps some type of situation like that?
I know that definitely, like in basketball, there have been, kind of questions of, athletes that have come from other countries to play here, professional basketball. And I don't know, Antonia, have you heard of any scenarios here?
Yes, there's like a famous NBA family that was under some controversy a couple of years back, just from the father anecdotally saying in an interview that he selected his wife based on attributes that would produce basically little NBA babies. And for this family, it was fairly successful. So the wife and the mother of the kids, athlete, very tall, great with agility and dexterity, including the father who has an athletic and basketball background. And they produce a group of 3 NBA players. So it happened to work for them.
See?
Mm-hmm.
So people are definitely in their own way using this sort of genetic selection, not in a laboratory, but doing similar to what my friend was saying, that she doesn't want to date someone who has sickle cell. Sickle cell you can't really see, but certainly you can see someone who's fit. You can see someone who's driven and fit and maybe muscular, and maybe you want to have athletes as kids. So that's really deep. That's so good. Thank you guys for bringing up those examples. I would definitely say to people, as we do in medicine, one of the standard things we do in medicine is, how is this information going to change? Like, what is the value? What am I going to do as a result of the information? I like the point that you mentioned, Antonia, about people, wanting to feel connected, but then do you really feel connected? Like, do you feel more connected to Europe? Do you feel more connected to Tanzania because you found out that that's where your origin is? Are you traveling back are you going to the Philippines? Are you traveling? Like, what does that do to human behavior? And I feel like if you don't think that it's going to change who you are and your behaviors, and if you knew that you were at risk for diabetes in the first place and you never change your lifestyle, would the genetic testing be that next step to make you become healthier? I don't know. I feel like people go through their behavioral patterns however they go through them. And I don't necessarily think that this is an additional push. But if you're going to consider getting tested, really ask yourself that question: how am I going to utilize this information? And then let that be a decision-making factor. That's my take on it. What do y'all think?
I mean, my take is always, the access, right? Like, even if people want to get it done, is there like a financial, cost to that? So who can actually get these tests done? I'm actually left with more questions than answers. The more that we're talking, especially with, the point that, Antonia made with the HeLa cells, that we all kind of know that, okay, Henrietta Lack was never given the opportunity, to just kind of give informed consent. And, had it not been for the HeLa cells, we already know many, many scientific, milestones would have never been achieved. Yeah. So I think there's always pros and cons, and I'm just saying I'm left with more questions and more thoughts. So Thank you for asking.
Yeah, I agree with you. I feel the same. I totally feel the same. How do you feel about it, Antonia?
I definitely think that I'm left with more questions, but this conversation was very insightful. I feel like I got a good little neck exercise from agreeing with everything that was being said. So I believe my takeaway from this is just knowing the risk and the benefits, and just, being able to assess the degree in which we ourselves are manipulating too much and playing God too much, or if we're really doing it for the benefit of medical advancements.
Love that. Like, what is our motivation? That's such a great question too. And I'll add I'll add one more thing that came up earlier. Is our control of the information. Like, who controls the information? Because that's basically the issue with Henrietta Lack's story, is that her family had, even afterwards, her family had really no control of the information that was obtained. So, really, who's doing the testing, and what is your protection as the person that is, as the consumer or as the patient, depending on the environment that you're getting tested in, who controls that information? If you don't have control, what are they able to do with that information and then keep you out of financially, perhaps? Like, if you're carrying the genes that is secure for something, do you get a piece of the pie, the financial pie, or does the company have all ownership to because you willingly and voluntarily did their test and there was no requirement to do so? So it's just, I agree with you guys. I agree with you ladies. There are so many, I say guys, so commonly. I agree with you ladies. I really think there are so many things that we really have to ask ourselves as a medical community, and also as just a fellow citizen, and in a society that's built on capitalism. So thank you, ladies, for brainstorming this topic with me. This topic has been one that definitely has been on my mind and on my heart as all these different ethical situations arise. So thank you for dropping your knowledge. Now, if people want to follow you for more knowledge drops on knowledge bombs, where can they find you, Veronica? How can they hit you up?
They can find me on Instagram at Carmona Veronica 20.
Awesome. Come on, Antonia. Where can they find you?
Mascara Medicine.
Ooh,
a little combo.
Fancy and sassy. And Ryan, y'all were checking out her makeup, so clearly it makes sense, right? Fabulous with her face. And I am yours truly, Dr. T, the hand behind the handle of Healthy Bump Club. We thank you for joining on this conversation. Let us know what you think. I'm really curious. What do you guys think out there about the testing, genetic testing, whether it's commercial testing or medical testing? How do you feel about that? Share your comments below. And don't forget to like, don't forget to share our videos. That's how we get in front of the crowd so that people get this information. Don't hold it to yourself. Share a little bit. And if you are not finding out when we are posting, that means you need to hit that bell. Go right ahead and hit that bell so that you get the notification when we post a new video. And as always, when you're done on YouTube and you've caught up on all our videos, because there's a whole lot of great knowledge on this platform, I'm telling y'all, make sure you hit us up on our Instagram at healthybump.club, where you find even more information about topics we don't even talk about on YouTube. So you get the best of both worlds. Make sure you do not miss out. And we love you guys for watching. Thank you for joining us. We're going to wave and say goodbye. See you next time.